what a difference a couple of weeks can make. Last time around, the earth was a little greener and cooler. My kids were already bored with summer vacation, and I announced a bunch of bold new changes around the idea of moving the Gryphon Manor world to Minecraft 1.20.1. Now, since then, I've been working on those changes, and while things didn't go nearly as easily or smoothly as I had hoped, it was still a lot more fun and easier than trying to motivate and entertain a couple of bored teenagers. It has also been an extremely productive time, and I've learned a great deal. And I've also grown more confident in my modded Minecraft skills and knowledge. But the thing about knowledge is that when you learn something new, it reveals yet new things to think and learn about, and so on and so on. It's a kind of feedback loop. And like I said, I learned a great deal, and it led to a lot of thinking and a lot of pondering and a lot of wondering, and I pretty much went through every synonym for thinking in the thesaurus. But before I go into what those thoughts were and how they are impacting the future of this project, let me talk a bit about what happened to kick off all this contemplation. It all started with opening the Gryphon Manor save game in 1.20.1, and for about 30 seconds it seemed like everything had basically worked. I was missing a few crops from the estate, but I was kind of expecting that. So I took a drive over to Andover, and that's when I discovered that except for the fact that nobody had evil-looking goatees, I had apparently wound up in the mirror universe. First off, I found that some mods make some pretty serious changes when they jump to the next major release of Minecraft. And I suppose that makes a lot of sense, but in this particular case, I had built much of Andover and the industrial building at the Watsaurus mine out of worn brick from the Create Deco mod. And unfortunately, worn bricks no longer exist in the Create Deco mod, at least not in 1.20.1, which means that in the places where I used those blocks directly, I now had missing walls with windows and doors hanging in midair. The blocks that made up the walls are simply gone. On the bright side of things, the breeze really carries through those buildings now. Another discovery was that in those cases where I had used the same worn bricks blocks in conjunction with the Domnum Ornamentum mod, in order to get those great looking open timber blocks, things were better, but still bad. In those cases, the hybrid blocks which combined the worn brick block with the dark oak framing were still around, but since worn bricks were no longer a thing in this world, the system replaced them with the framing material. So I had dark oak plank blocks framed with more dark oak planks. And surprisingly, those actually look pretty good. They kind of look like chiseled planks blocks, but it's not what I wanted in that place or at that time. But it did turn out to be a classic example of learning something useful from a mistake, like discovering the flavor profile of Reese's peanut butter cups because I literally ran into some kid enjoying a chocolate bar while I was dipping directly out of a jar of peanut butter. But I digress. There were a lot more changes like that, though most of them were smaller in scope and proportionately less annoying. Sometimes I was missing textures and sometimes I was missing models. But I think the biggest negative blow was to find that the Create Ore Excavation mod completely withdrew the existing ore deposits in the save game, and then apparently rolled up all new ones. So the iron mine north of Andover was mining a bunch of air, and the coal extraction facility I'd built in the workshop level of the estate had run dry. I had a moment where I was transported back to 1980 and I was playing the original stand-up version of Atari's Battlezone at the arcade, and the only thing I could hear was the end of game music when I lost my last tank, and it hurt just as much now as it did back then. So, after assessing the damage and putting it all together, I decided that I just didn't have it in me to press on with the move to 1.20.1. But that shouldn't have killed Gryphon Manor. I mean, logically, it would just lock me into Minecraft 1.19.2, and that wasn't a bad thing at all. I mean, in fact, I was looking forward to just pressing on with what I had. After all, I had come a long way, and I had a lot of great plans and prospects already lined up. So I returned to Gryphon Manor 1.19.2, but I made some changes to the mod mix. I incorporated the new mods I had chosen for the move to 1.20.1, or at least the ones that were available in the earlier version, and I removed immersive engineering. But all of this was problematic, as any new material or resource produced by these mods was now at least 5 kilometers away in every direction, and as a result of the repeated additions and deletions of other mods over the past year, the landscape closer to home still looked pretty great, but what it had to offer me was pretty hosed. Of course, I'd been through all this before, and I had lived with the inconvenience when I added immersive engineering and all the new ores were at least 2.5 kilometers away. And while I tolerated it at the time, I wasn't having a lot of fun with that. Now that the situation was even worse, I came to the realization that I needed a lot more evenly distributed and consistent world. So this left me at a crossroads. Moving Gryphon Manor to 1.20.1 was a major headache because of all the bits that would be broken between versions, and even after I got all that cleaned up, I would still have the same problem as 1.19.2, where the new stuff would only be available a rather long ways from home, and the world I had built was definitely suffering from growing pains due to the months of adding and removing mods and tweaking the world generation. Once I realized all this, I was not particularly thrilled with either option. It's like not wanting to cook, so you go out to eat and finding that your only two choices of side orders for your cheeseburger is a kale salad or broccoli. And technically, either one would work, but now that you know what the limited choices are, you realize that you probably should just go home and cook something for yourself after all. Well, crud. So, after all my thinking, pondering, and soul-searching, I did a whole lot more thinking, pondering, and soul-searching, and the result of all that deep thought was 42. No, seriously, I'm going to press on with 1.20.1 after all. The new mod mix I've built for that version is very exciting to me. There are some great performance mods, some great new content mods, and I have a whole new world generation mix that's going to give me grander and more realistic worlds, and all of that is very enticing just by itself. However, when I say I'm pressing on with 1.20.1, I mean that I'm going to leave Gryphon Manor behind. I'm rebooting again. It's time for a clean sweep. Gryphon Hall died on the table, and Gryphon Manor will retire with dignity, and this new world will be the latest iteration of this project. But as the saying goes, the third time's the charm, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, you can think of it as a distillation process. I started out with a very rough-cut modded world in Gryphon Hall, and considering that I had maybe 20 to 40 hours of modded Minecraft experience under my belt when I spun the series up, I was amazed that I got as far as I did, and I learned a ton of useful stuff from that experience. Now, I had considerably more knowledge and experience stepping into Gryphon Manor, and I think it's turned out considerably more robust and interesting. So I think the trend will continue, and this new world will be even better. So now I'm genuinely excited at the prospect of the newest reboot. So let me share some of my thoughts so far, though none of this is set in concrete, but let's just say that I poured the concrete and it's already been sitting for about an hour or so. In fact, the neighbor kids are putting their handprints and initials in it now. First and foremost, I'm sticking with the steampunk motif, but now I'm doubling and tripling down on it. And that includes some new steampunk-ish mods that are definitely more steampunky than most anything I had before. But it also includes changing the primary design and scope of the project. Now in this case, I will still eventually scout and build across the land as I had before, but that will take a very distant second place to building a city. A large and proper steampunky city with a working overhead monorail and a lot of the classic features we've come to expect from the genre, including a grand and beautiful upper city and a dark and dirty underbelly where the actual work gets done. There will be vehicles galore, including an overland railway network and the tube system, as well as an aerodrome and a bustling and functional seaport. I'm already working on trying to determine the scale and general layout, and ultimately the entire city will be my base, as it'll be big enough to distribute the causes of lag that have hindered me in the past. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Unfortunately, it'll be a while before this new city will be even close to a reality, so I'll craft a little cottage nearby and run operations, probably manually, out of that until I can move them to the big city. Of course, a lot of this came from my planning for the city that I intended to build in Gryphon Manor. Now, that city was going to be called Sudchester, but I'll come up with a new name for this new city. I have some ideas, but I'm not quite ready to share them just yet. But if you have some ideas, go ahead and post them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. While I'm at it, I think I'll change the series format a bit as well. Up to now, the series has been more of a vlog format, and I think I'll switch over to a hybrid format. It'll be mostly Let's Play, but still have bits of a vlog in there to share plans, designs, and finished projects. Now, this will be a bit of a stretch for me, but in talking to viewers, I think there's a genuine desire for me to move the series in that direction, so I'll give it a bash. Frankly, I personally enjoy a really good Let's Play series, so let's see if I'm up to the challenge of making a really good Let's Play series. There's still a lot of active series out there, but quality's kind of hit and miss, so if I do this right, I just might have something that could compete with some of the better content out there. My mom will be so proud. As I said, I'm gearing up to take my third run at this, and I'm reminded of the old saying that if it doesn't kill me, it just makes me stronger. So along those lines, I learned a great deal from the first go, and I learned quite a bit from the second, and I survived to tell the tale, so let me share some of my hard-won wisdom. First, before I launch, I will do a pass over each mod to ensure that it basically works as intended. Now, crashing issues will have to be dealt with by either downloading the fix or dropping the mod, and that's just what you need to do regardless. However, what is new in this approach is that once everything's verified, I'll freeze it all. No more changes to the mod mix, no more updates. Period. And this was a hard one for me to learn because I've spent decades in the software biz, and basically as a general rule, you need to keep all your software updated. Though I do agree that taking updates as soon as possible is not always the wisest choice. Personally, I prefer to put off updates by a week or so to ensure that it really is an upgrade and not a brand new problem. But it also means that when somebody posts some amazing new mod or update, I can look, I can drool, but I can't touch. But it'll keep everything much more stable. This is because changing the mod mix and updating existing mods is what got me in the trouble with Gryphon Manor. There were over 200 mods, and every time I made a change to the mod mix, like adding one, or getting rid of one, or updating one, changes were likely across the board, and if I was going to be all careful and proper about it, I could have and should have done a complete pass over all the mods individually to make sure that they were still working as intended. And the problem is that would require a crazy amount of extra work and thus not sustainable unless I wanted to release a new episode every month or two. And of course, that's why I didn't do it. But I think the game world eventually died by 10,000 paper cuts, and with the rate of changes in 1.19.2 dwindling down to a mere trickle, the chances of getting everything back into full working order diminishes every week. So, I need to get disciplined. Draconian even. Once the game clock starts, the mod mix is what it is. However, one can never realistically say never. So I will go on the record to publicly carve out two exceptions. The first is in the case of crashing issues or data loss. If I happen to run into these and there is a fix available, I'll take that fix and only that fix, and then yes, I will need to take a couple days to go through all the mods, make sure the fix didn't break anything. The second exception will be for my own changes. Now, since these are usually in the form of simple and straightforward recipe and or texture changes, they're pretty low risk, and I feel comfortable making these changes even if everything else is frozen in place. However, there are a few things I'll be adding to the mix that are probably non-trivial, like the introduction of new villager professions and overhauling the economy and trade systems that I talked about last time. Now, I need to get those sorted out and in place before I reboot the series. It doesn't bother me if all the new merchants look like regular villagers, at least for now, as textures are something I can work on here and there and will almost certainly not break anything in a critical way. But the fundamental mechanics of the new economy need to be figured out, implemented, and working before I go live with this project. You might recall that I mentioned the distributed performance a minute or so ago, and if you remember even further back, I've had a real problem with performance and especially frame rate when I was around a lot of busy bits from the Create mod. I think it was what ultimately killed Gryphon Hall, and it has bit me in the butt a couple times with Gryphon Manor. So windmills and water mills were particularly problematic, and my solution was to quit using them as proper sources of power, but rather to use them primarily as props, and very sparingly at that. I would instead rely on creative motors, and to achieve that, I created a recipe for them so I could build them in survival mode. Since then, I found a working version of the Iris and Oculus Flywheel Compat for 1.20.1, and it really does seem to make a big difference. So, I will still keep the recipe for creative motors, but I will try, at least initially, to rely on using the crate bits as intended for survival play, and to help make that work, I have somewhat ditched my plan to completely centralize absolutely everything. There will still be a big concentration of resource production and processing in the city, but even then the city will probably be large enough that I can move these facilities further apart, and that may alleviate some of the issues. Now, I'm also adopting Distant Horizons. I found it to work so well that I've reduced my render and simulation distances, and that has also helped boost performance substantially, while still looking mighty fine. In addition, I will decentralize resource production even further by doing something that I just barely started to think about and implement in Gryphon Manor. As I eventually move out into the wider game world, I will build towns and villages, and each of them will have some features and resources in common with each other, but each will also have their own specialties, which means that for some stuff, I'll just have to go back to whichever settlement specializes in that resource. Yeah, that'll slow things down as those settlements can't all be in loaded chunks all the time, so sometimes I might have to ride into town and find something to do while the locals prepare my order. But you know what? That's pretty much how the real world works, so while it is certainly a bit inconvenient, I kind of embrace it in the name of realism. Kinda. I think there'll be one more episode of Gryphon Manor, and it will be a bit of a retrospective. I will go over what worked, what didn't work quite so well, and what I regret that I never got around to do, and explain how all of that will impact the next series. So I would also love to hear from all of you as to what you think about Gryphon Manor and my plans to reboot again, including my plans to go with the Let's Play format. After all, I do this for you as much as I do it for myself, so I really do want to hear what you think. In the meanwhile, I hope you will tune in again to see the end result, and I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and a touch of good fortune. Take care of yourselves out there. Cheers.